Years passed, yet the memory of that storm never left completely. It simply softened, like distant thunder fading into a lullaby you almost forget is there. Life had changed in every way that mattered. Lily was now 13, her curls longer, her laugh deeper, her courage untouched by time. The rainbow ramp outside our home had become a local landmark. People still slowed their cars when they passed it. Some taking pictures, others leaving small stones painted with words like love, unity, and brave. The neighborhood that once hid behind fences now flourished as a true community, open doors, shared meals, and neighbors who knew each other's names. On weekends, the smell of barbecue and fresh-cut grass replaced the stiff quiet that used to define our street. The HOA, now entirely volunteer-led, had shifted focus from rules to service. They organized cleanups, helped elderly residents repair roofs, and even hosted disability awareness workshops inspired by Lily's story. What had once been a breeding ground for control had turned into a haven for compassion. I still chaired the accessibility committee, and every meeting began with the same reminder: we're here to help, not to police. People took it to heart. It amazed me how simple kindness could rebuild what fear had broken. Lily herself had become something of a local celebrity, though she never sought the spotlight. Her artwork, vibrant and full of color, began appearing at county fairs and school exhibits. She had an eye for turning ordinary moments into hope: a window reflecting rain light, a dog shaking off water under a porch, a pair of hands holding an umbrella for someone else. Each painting carried the same signature at the bottom, Ellis, and each one seemed to whisper the same message: Storm's End. One of her pieces, a watercolor titled After the Rain, even won a regional award and hung in the town library. When we went to see it on display, she looked up at me with quiet pride. "It's weird," she said, "how something that hurt so much can make something beautiful later." I nodded. "That's how growth works, kiddo." She grinned. "Then I guess we're gardeners." We laughed, but she was right. The whole neighborhood had become a garden, each person planting seeds of kindness where weeds of cruelty once grew. It wasn't until the 5th anniversary of that storm that I realized how far we'd come. The HOA decided to hold a special celebration that year, not just Rainbow Day, but a full-on community fair. Booths lined the street, crafts, homemade food, music from a local band. The county sheriff's department even sent a patrol car so kids could explore and learn about real law enforcement, the kind that protects, not intimidates. Julia, now retired from a marshal service, volunteered to help organize safety demonstrations for families. I watched her teach kids how to identify real officers and what to do if they ever felt unsafe. It struck me how full circle it all felt. The very badge that had once scared off 2 imposters was now a symbol of trust and education. During the fair, a young couple approached me with their toddler son. The father said, "We moved here because of your story. We wanted to raise our boy in a place where people actually look out for one another." I didn't know what to say. All I could manage was, "Welcome home." Later that evening, as lanterns lit up the dusk, Diane took the small stage set up at the end of the cul-de-sac. 5 years ago, she began. "A terrible night reminded us what happens when fear rules, but one family and one little girl showed us that compassion is stronger than any storm." She gestured toward Lily, who blushed as the crowd clapped. I watched her roll forward shyly, waving to everyone, her smile glowing in the soft light. When the applause quieted, she spoke into the microphone. "My dad always says storms don't last forever. And he's right. But sometimes they come back to check if you remember what you learned. I hope we always do." Her words settled over the crowd like a benediction. Some people wiped tears, others simply smiled, nodding. I felt something inside me unwind, a final knot of pain releasing. As the night deepened, fireworks began crackling above the horizon. Reflections of color shimmered across wet pavement from a light drizzle that had started halfway through the show. No one ran for cover this time. Instead, umbrellas opened, laughter rose, and children danced in the gentle rain. I looked at Lily, her face lit by bursts of gold and blue in the sky. "Still scared of storms?" I teased. She laughed, shaking her head. Not anymore. They're just the sky, getting excited. Her answer made me laugh too, but it also made my throat tighten, because she turned fear into wonder, something even grown-ups rarely manage. Julia slipped her hand into mine, and together we watched our daughter laugh under the soft rain, surrounded by neighbors who'd once been strangers. When the fair ended and the last booths closed, the three of us walked home through the quiet street. The rainbow ramp gleamed faintly under the streetlight, still bright after all these years. We stood in front of it for a moment, taking it in. It needs a new coat of paint, Julia said softly. Yeah, I nodded. But maybe we let the neighborhood kids do it this time. Lily smiled. Can we make it bigger? Maybe with sparkles? Julia chuckled. You're the artist, honey. It's your rainbow. Lily yawned, leaning her head against my arm. Then I wanted to shine. And I knew she didn't just mean the paint. The next morning, half the neighborhood showed up with brushes, paints, and coffee. Even the mayor stopped by briefly to thank Lily for reminding our town what community looks like. We let the kids choose the colors this time: purples, teals, golds. And by afternoon, the ramp sparkled just like Lily had imagined. When it dried, someone added a small sign at the base that read, "Built by many hands, for all hearts." Standing there, watching sunlight reflect off the glittering paint, I realized that the rainbow wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to everyone who had decided to be better than they were. That evening, as twilight fell, I sat on the porch with Julia while Lily painted in her sketchbook. The air smelled like rain and pine. You ever think about what would have happened if we'd moved away? Julia asked quietly. I thought for a long moment before answering. Yeah, but then we wouldn't have seen this. I gestured to the street where kids were still running, where laughter carried on the wind. Sometimes you have to stay in the place that hurt you just long enough to heal it. She nodded. I'm glad we did. Silence settled between us, comfortable and full. From inside the house came the faint hum of Lily's favorite song, a melody she'd been humming since the day we repainted the ramp. The notes mingled with the sound of crickets, the whisper of leaves, the soft pulse of life returning to normal. Later that night, after Julia went inside, I stayed on the porch alone, looking up at the sky. A few clouds drifted across the moon, and for a moment I thought I heard distant thunder again, but it didn't scare me. It sounded almost like applause, maybe from the universe itself, echoing approval for a story that had finally found its peace. I thought about how every decision we make, every act of kindness or cruelty, ripples outward in ways we'll never fully see. Karen's choices had once brought pain, but they'd also indirectly created this community of light. And that realization didn't make me bitter, it made me grateful. Because if darkness can create light, then no storm is ever wasted. I whispered a quiet thank you to life, to grace, to second chances, and then went inside to check on Lily one last time. She was asleep, her sketchbook open on the nightstand, a new drawing half finished. It showed a rainbow stretching across a calm sky, with words written underneath in her careful handwriting. No storm lasts forever. I stood there for a long time, the room lit only by moonlight, and smiled. Outside, the rainbow ramp glowed faintly, catching the silver of night. It wasn't just paint, it was a promise, one that would outlast us all. Section 2. The confrontation the following week, the HOA announced an emergency community standards meeting, and I knew before reading the email who was behind it. The message came in the usual cheerful HOA font, keeping Maple Creek beautiful together, but the tone beneath was sharp. Karen had attached photos of non-compliant decorative items and unauthorized garden modifications. Right there in the middle of the collage was a picture of Lily's daisies, bright and cheerful against the curb. My stomach turned. She hadn't even waited a full week before turning my daughter's flowers into a violation. That Thursday evening, the meeting took place in the community hall, a polished, sterile space with white walls, fluorescent lights, and rows of folding chairs facing the HOA board's table. Karen sat in the center like a judge about to pronounce sentence, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. My wife squeezed my hand as we took our seats. Lily sat beside us, holding her sketchbook in her lap, swinging her feet, and humming quietly. She had no idea the meeting was about her. When the gavel tapped on the table, Karen smiled with that perfect, deliberate precision. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our mid-spring meeting. We have a few matters of compliance to address. Nothing too serious, of course, just ensuring that we maintain Maple Creek's signature charm." She went through a few trivial points: overgrown hedges, trash bins visible from the street, before clicking her remote to change the slide on the projector. My heart sank. The next image was Lily's row of daisies and her colorful handmade sign. Karen clasped her hands in mock disappointment. Now, while we all appreciate community spirit, we do have to adhere to uniform landscaping standards. The entrance area, as stated in our bylaws, is reserved for HOA-approved designs. Unauthorized plantings must be removed immediately. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "A kid planted those." Another said, "They're just flowers." Karen ignored them. Additionally, she continued, "I must remind residents that modifications to public areas require prior approval. We simply can't allow personal expression to override aesthetic cohesion." I stood slowly. "You're talking about my daughter's flowers, aren't you?" Karen turned that icy smile on me. "Mr. Johnson, this isn't personal. We all have to follow the same rules." "They're daisies," I said. "They're not hurting anyone." "They are not compliant with the color guidelines," she replied. "And the sign," she gestured toward the photo of Lily's pink and green painting, "while adorable, is not professionally printed or approved." Lily looked up confused. "You mean my sign?" she asked softly. "It just says we should make things pretty." Karen's tone shifted from patronizing to performative pity. "Sweetheart," she said loudly, her voice echoing across the room, "we love that you want to help, but some things are best left to adults who understand the rules." The air in the room changed. Every parent, every neighbor felt the sting of those words. My wife gasped quietly, and I saw tears forming in Lily's eyes. She whispered, "I just wanted to help." I clenched my fists. "Karen, enough," I said sharply. "You could have talked to us privately. You didn't need to embarrass a child to make a point." Karen raised her chin. "No one's being embarrassed. We're simply maintaining order. It's not my fault if some people don't understand how a homeowners association operates." One of the other board members, a balding man named Roger, cleared his throat. "Karen, maybe we could have handled this one quietly. It's just flowers, after all." Karen shot him a glare that could have frozen steel. "Roger, we must be consistent. Exceptions invite chaos." Then, looking back at me, she added with that fake sweet tone, "I'm sure as a parent you understand the importance of rules. You wouldn't want your daughter thinking she can just do whatever she likes, would you?" I stared at her for a long second, forcing myself to stay calm. "You know what I want." I said finally, "I want a neighborhood where kindness matters more than color-coordinated shrubs." Karen gave a brittle laugh. "That's a lovely sentiment, Mr. Johnson. Unfortunately, sentiment doesn't keep property values high." The meeting dissolved into tension and murmurs. A few neighbors actually clapped quietly when I sat down, others avoided eye contact, but Karen had made her point. She wanted control, and she'd get it even if it meant crushing an 8-year-old's joy in front of the whole neighborhood. After the meeting ended, I bent down to comfort Lily. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't do something bad, did I, Daddy?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No, sweetheart. You did something beautiful. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But Karen wasn't done. As we packed up to leave, she approached us near the door. "Mr. Johnson," she said, lowering her voice, "if you'd just followed the process, none of this would have been necessary. I hope there won't be further complications." "Complications?" I repeated, my temper flaring. She smiled thinly. "You'd be surprised how quickly the board can issue fines or reconsider community privileges. Best not to make this personal." Before I could reply, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance. That night, Lily wouldn't touch her dinner. She sat by the window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. "Miss Karen said I shouldn't help," she murmured. "Maybe I'll just stay inside from now on." My wife tried to comfort her, But I saw the heartbreak behind her brave smile. And as I sat there, watching lightning flash across the sky, I realized that what Karen had done wasn't just petty, it was cruel. She'd humiliated my daughter in public and made her feel small in the one place she was supposed to feel safe. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I made a silent promise to myself that night. Karen was going to learn what real accountability looked like. Because this time, she hadn't picked a rule breaker. She'd picked the wrong father. Section 3. The turning point the morning after that meeting, Maple Creek felt different. When I stepped outside to grab the mail, I noticed something odd. Neighbors who usually waved at me just looked away. Some offered awkward half smiles, others pretended to be busy pruning their gardens. The neighborhood grapevine, as always, had worked overnight. I knew how this went. Karen had probably sent out one of her community update emails, the kind with sugary phrasing and venom between the lines. Sure enough, when I opened my inbox, there it was, subject line, upholding standards together. The email didn't name us, but it didn't need to. Phrases like unauthorized resident modifications, parental supervision concerns, and respect for process and leadership were all carefully chosen daggers aimed right at our family. I was furious, but more than that, I was tired. Tired of watching Lily's face fall every time someone made her feel like she didn't belong. Tired of Karen acting like decency was optional. But I wasn't going to lose my temper. I had learned from experience that people like Karen thrive on confrontation. They feed off it, twist it, and turn it into evidence of your instability. No, if she wanted to play the politics game, then I'd play it better. So I began collecting facts. Every email, every notice, every violation letter she'd ever sent us went into a neatly labeled folder. I even took photos, before and after shots of the flowers she complained about, timestamps on when her letters were delivered, everything. Then I started listening. When I walked Lily to school or waved to neighbors, asked quiet questions. Has Karen ever fined you for something weird? Did she threaten to revoke your privileges? Did she ever say you couldn't decorate your porch? The answers came slowly at first, whispered and cautious, but then something shifted. People began to realize they weren't alone. Turns out, Karen had a long history of bullying. One woman told me Karen threatened to fine her for hanging a small pride flag. Another man said she'd reported his teenage son for playing music too loudly when he was just practicing guitar in the garage. A retired couple had been forced to repaint their front door twice because Karen decided the shade didn't photograph well for brochures. And yet no one had ever stood up to her because she had allies on the HOA board and a reputation for retaliating against anyone who challenged her authority. But that was before she messed with Lily. Meanwhile, my daughter had stopped going outside altogether. Every day after school, she went straight to her room. Her daisies had started to wilt from neglect, and her once bright window sign had faded from the sun. My wife tried to lift her spirits with baking projects and movie nights, but I could see the difference in her smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. Watching that change broke something in me. One Friday afternoon, as I was trimming the hedge, a soft voice called from across the street. It was Mrs. Whitfield, one of the older neighbors. "You handled yourself well at that meeting," she said, her tone low but warm. "Karen's been out of control for years." She looked around nervously before adding, "You're not the only one tired of it." That small moment was the spark. Within a week, I'd quietly connected with half a dozen residents who felt the same way. We started meeting at my house, informally after sunset, blinds closed, coffee brewing. It felt like a secret resistance group against a tyrant with a clipboard. People shared their stories, their fines, their frustrations. Roger, the board member who had spoken up during the meeting, joined us too. "You have no idea how much pressure she puts on us," he said. "She threatens to have us removed from the board if we don't vote her way." That's when I realized this wasn't just about my daughter's flowers anymore. It was about a pattern of control disguised as order, a misuse of power that had poisoned the entire community. We decided to fight back, but not with anger, with accountability. Roger explained that HOA board members were legally required to keep transparent financial records. And if Karen had been collecting fines unfairly or using HOA funds improperly, that could mean serious trouble. I started filing formal requests under our community bylaws for financial disclosures and correspondence logs. When she didn't respond within the legal window, I followed up. When she delayed again, I copied the HOA management company. I wasn't loud, I was methodical. By the end of that month, the calm facade of Maple Creek had begun to crack. People started questioning Karen's decisions openly. Someone even printed flyers that read, "Who does the HOA serve, us or her?" and slipped them into mailboxes. Karen retaliated with her usual tactics, snide remarks, thinly veiled threats, but the tone of her emails had changed. She was defensive, now rattled. Then came the breaking point. During the next HOA gathering, this time held outdoors near the clubhouse, Karen tried to restore control with her trademark composure. She announced new decorative limitations, including a ban on personalized signage visible from public streets. It was a direct hit at Lily's window art. "We must maintain visual harmony," she said, her voice honeyed but brittle. "Some residents have been introducing distractions." Before I could speak, Roger stood up. "Karen," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "maybe it's time we discussed how decisions are made around here." The crowd stirred. Karen blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said. "People are tired of being ruled by fear of fines and favoritism. This isn't a dictatorship, and what you did to the Johnson family was out of line." Karen's smile froze, her eyes flashing with panic. "This is highly inappropriate, Roger." "No," he said, his voice steady. "What's inappropriate is humiliating an 8-year-old to prove a point." The crowd murmured louder. Some nodded, others clapped. Karen looked around, realizing her power was slipping. She tried to regain control, waving her hands. "Everyone, please, let's not turn this into a spectacle," but it was already too late. One by one, neighbors started speaking up. "You fined me for my wind chime. You called the cops on my nephew for parking on the street. You yelled at my wife over our flower beds." The list went on, each voice adding to the storm. And then, quietly, I stepped forward. "You called my daughter a distraction," I said. "You made her feel like she didn't belong in the only home where she's ever felt safe. You've broken people's spirits in the name of order." But here's the thing, Karen, you can't control kindness. You can't regulate compassion. And you can't silence a neighborhood that's finally had enough. For once, she had no response. Her lips trembled as she looked around and saw the disapproval on every face. Her control, her influence, her little empire, it was all slipping through her fingers like sand. That day, Maple Creek changed forever. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first real crack in the wall she'd built around us. And as I looked down at Lily, standing beside me with her small hand in mine, I realized something I hadn't before. She didn't need her flowers to make the world brighter. She was the light that had finally made others see the truth. Section 4. The reckoning, the fallout from that meeting spread through Maple Creek faster than gossip ever had before. The once untouchable Karen Whitmore had finally lost control of her perfectly trimmed kingdom. Within 24 hours, the HOA's group chat, usually filled with reminders about lawn heights and recycling bins, became a battlefield of accusations and confessions. Some neighbors defended her at first, clinging to the order she represented, but most were done being afraid. Screenshots of Karen's old messages started circulating, threats, personal insults, and notes where she fined people for absurd reasons like decorative imbalance or unauthorized play equipment. My inbox flooded with stories from people I'd barely spoken to before. Each message began the same way. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but Roger, to his credit, didn't waste time. He called an emergency board meeting, this time without Karen's knowledge. We held it at his house, away from the clubhouse cameras she'd install for safety. The evidence we gathered was overwhelming: violations issued without documentation, fines collected without proper accounting, and correspondence showing that she'd used HOA funds for community improvement projects that, coincidentally, were all at her own property. Even the landscaping company she'd hired turned out to be owned by her cousin. It was corruption hiding in plain sight, buried beneath polite language and HOA bureaucracy. Roger looked exhausted as he spread the papers across his dining table. "We can't cover for her anymore," he said. "This isn't just bullying, it's fraud." I nodded. "Then we do it right. We take this to the management company and the county housing authority." He hesitated. "You know she's going to come after you when she finds out." I smiled grimly. She already did. But this time, she picked the wrong family. The next week was chaos. The HOA management company sent auditors to review the records, and suddenly Karen's carefully curated image began to crumble. She tried to play innocent, claiming the documents were taken out of context, that we were misinterpreting bylaws. But the numbers didn't lie. When the auditors discovered thousands of dollars in miscellaneous expenses routed to her personal account, the tone of their questions changed from polite to prosecutorial. Karen, of course, tried to spin it all as a misunderstanding. She sent out a desperate mass email full of excuses about administrative errors and community betrayal. But the residents weren't buying it anymore. The same people who once cowered before her clipboard now responded with sharp, unforgiving replies. "We trusted you. You humiliated our kids. You fined me for a bird feeder while stealing from us." Then came the board vote. The bylaws allowed for the immediate removal of any member found to be in violation of ethical conduct. Roger called the meeting publicly this time. Karen showed up wearing a blazer and pearls like armor, carrying a stack of papers she claimed would clear her name. The room was packed, dozens of neighbors, some standing along the walls, all watching. Roger stood at the front, his voice steady but cold. "Karen Whitmore, as president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association, you are being presented with evidence of misconduct, including misuse of HOA funds, intimidation of residents, and abuse of authority. You have the right to respond before the board votes on your removal." Karen forced a smile. "This is a witch hunt. You're all falling for lies. These so-called audits are incomplete. I've given years of service to this neighborhood, and this is how I'm repaid? By people who can't follow simple rules." A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone shouted, "You fined me for a Halloween pumpkin." Another voice added, "You called my son's therapy dog a nuisance." Karen's composure began to crack. "Order," she shouted, but no one listened. For the first time, she wasn't in control. I stood up slowly, not to gloat, but to finish what she had started months ago when she humiliated my daughter. "You said this wasn't personal," I said, my voice calm. "But you made it personal when you singled out an 8-year-old in front of the whole community. You said rules keep order. But rules without compassion are just cages. And you've been building cages here for years." Karen turned toward me, her eyes narrowing. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think this place will survive without me? I built this neighborhood." Roger's gavel hit the table once. "Enough. Board members, cast your votes." The room went silent except for the scratching of pens on paper. When the last ballot was dropped into the box, Roger opened it, counted slowly, and looked up. 4-0, he said. "Effective immediately, Karen Whitmore is removed from her position as HOA president." There was a beat of silence, then applause erupted. It wasn't loud at first, just a few claps here and there, but it grew and grew until the sound filled the hall like thunder. Karen stood frozen, her eyes darting around as if she couldn't quite process what had happened. Then, with her face pale and her hands shaking, she gathered her papers and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone near the back said quietly, "About time," and laughter rippled through the crowd. Afterward, as people lingered, shaking hands and whispering about what came next, Lily approached Roger shyly. She held out a small watercolor she'd painted, a picture of daisies blooming under a bright blue sky. "For you," she said. "For helping." Roger smiled, his voice catching. "Thank you, sweetheart. I think these are the kind of flowers Maple Creek needs." That night, when we got home, the first thing I noticed was the row of daisies by our walkway. They'd perked up again after the recent rain, their petals glistening in the porch light. Lily knelt beside them, brushing her fingers gently across the blooms. "They look happy again," she said softly. I crouched beside her. "They are," I said, "because they finally got some sunshine." But deep down, I knew the real light came from her. The little girl who'd done nothing but try to make the world brighter and who had unknowingly inspired an entire neighborhood to stand up for what was right. Karen would later face legal consequences once the audit results were sent to the county, but by then, Maple Creek had already moved on. For the first time in years, people were smiling at each other without fear. Fences were painted bright again, kids played in the cul-de-sac, and laughter replaced the silence that once hung over our perfect little street. And as I watched Lily chase fireflies that evening, her braces gleaming under the soft glow of the porch light, I realized that what Karen had tried to break wasn't just our peace, it was our spirit. But she'd failed because you can't control a community built on compassion. Section 5. A new beginning. Weeks passed, and the echo of Karen's downfall slowly faded into the rhythm of normal life in Maple Creek. The HOA, now under Roger's leadership, had begun rebuilding, not just the administrative structure, but the trust and spirit that had been lost under years of intimidation. New bylaws were written to emphasize fairness and community involvement. Gone were the absurd rules about flower colors, fence heights, and driveway chalk art. In their place came simple, human-centered principles: respect your neighbor, maintain your property, and remember that kindness comes before control. The neighborhood began to breathe again. For the first time in a long while, the streets of Maple Creek felt alive. Kids laughed freely as they rode their bikes, families gathered for barbecues, and the air was filled with the kind of small-town warmth we'd forgotten existed. There was no fear of HOA patrols anymore, no clipboard-carrying tyrant waiting to ruin your day over a wind chime. The entire place seemed to glow differently, as if the sun finally decided Maple Creek was worth shining on again. For our family, things changed even more profoundly. Lily's confidence grew with every passing day. She started joining other kids outside more often, her wheelchair no longer something she tried to hide behind. The same neighbors who once avoided eye contact now went out of their way to greet her, often stopping to admire her artwork or help her plant new flowers by the fence. She was the beating heart of the block now, the quiet proof that kindness always wins in the end. One morning, as we stood by the garden together, she pointed at the patch of daisies she'd painted in her picture for Roger. They'd flourished, spreading out in clusters of white and yellow across our yard. "Daddy," she said, "can we plant some by the park too? So everyone can see them?" I smiled. "I think that's the best idea you've ever had." The next weekend, we turned her idea into something bigger. Roger and a few other board members helped organize a community planning day. Dozens of neighbors showed up, parents, kids, even older residents who hadn't been outside much during Karen's reign. We dug together, laughed together, and slowly transformed the edge of the park into a sea of daisies. Lily sat in her chair in the middle of it all, directing where each patch should go. "More on that side," she'd say, waving her hand. "That one needs more sunshine." As the last plant went into the soil, Roger stood beside me, wiping sweat from his brow. He said, "I think this is the first time this neighborhood has actually felt like a community." I nodded, watching Lily smile as a breeze fluttered through the flowers. All it took was one brave little girl. He looked at her too, and his voice softened. No, it took a family who refused to stay quiet. The weeks that followed cemented that change. The daisies became a symbol for the entire town. People started calling that stretch of the park Lily's Garden, and she became something of a local hero, not for standing up to Karen directly, but for reminding everyone what compassion really looks like. The local paper even did a small piece about her, titled "How a Child's Garden Healed a Neighborhood." She blushed when the photographer took her picture, but when she saw it printed a few days later, she whispered me, "Maybe Karen will see it and be nice next time." That simple innocence, believing even someone like Karen could change, was what struck me most. I'd carried anger for so long, justified as it may have been, But Lily's way of seeing the world reminded me that true strength doesn't come from revenge. It comes from forgiveness, from choosing to grow instead of hardening. Months later, we did hear about Karen again. She'd moved out of Maple Creek, reportedly downsized to an apartment in the next county. Roger told me she'd been barred from holding any HOA positions after the investigation into her financial misconduct. When I saw her name on the report, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Just closure. Some people destroy themselves trying to control others. Karen was one of them. Life went on. Lily's garden continued to bloom, drawing butterflies and children alike. Every spring, new flowers sprouted from seeds carried by the wind, slowly spreading beyond our yard and into the park like kindness reclaiming lost ground. One evening, a few months after it all ended, Lily and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, and the air was thick with the scent of daisies. She leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "Daddy, remember when Miss Karen said my flowers didn't belong here?" I felt my throat tighten a bit. "Yeah, sweetheart, I remember." She smiled softly. "Well, now they're everywhere." I looked out over the sea of yellow and white, stretching across the fields like a quiet victory. "Yeah," I whispered, "they are." And in that moment, I realized something. We often think strength means fighting back, shouting louder, standing taller. But sometimes it's just staying kind when the world gives you every reason not to be. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to plant something beautiful where someone tried to sow hate. As the last light of day faded over Maple Creek, I could almost hear the laughter of children echoing through the breeze, mingling with the soft rustle of the flowers. The world felt lighter again. The pain, the anger, the fear, they were all still part of the story, but they weren't the ending. The ending was hope. The ending was daisies.